Since you believe your diaphragm is definitely in a low position, let me tell you now, that also means your transversus thoracis muscle is definitely tense. But why are these two things equivalent? Do you still remember what the main reason for transversus thoracis tension is? It helps with exhalation. Do you remember the two concepts I explained to everyone yesterday? One is called active exhalation and the other is called passive exhalation. For most of us, and for most patients, exhalation is now mainly passive. What is passive exhalation? It means you're only relying on the elastic recoil of your lungs. If you only use the elastic recoil of your lungs, the amount of air you exhale is too little. But you can't engage your abdominal muscles below, and you can't rely on your pelvic floor muscles either. If I can't rely on anything else, I can only depend on the area around my lungs. So at this point, the transverse thoracic muscle is the first to step in, taking the top spot. It contracts to help you exhale, so it assists you in completing passive exhalation. Since your diaphragm is still in a lower position, it means the muscles that push the diaphragm upward are weak. So when you exhale, you have to rely on this muscle to generate force. Some people might say, but I see a lot of people like this at the gym. Their transverse thoracic muscles must be tense too. Let me tell you, yes, they're tense, because I've seen even more cases than you have. Why are they still tense in this situation? Let me ask you this. Upper chest, middle chest, lower chest, which one is relatively harder to train? You'll notice that even for people like this, their chest here is well developed, but their upper chest is sunken. Then if you use your fingers to measure the gaps between his ribs, you'll find that the gaps are wider at the bottom and narrower at the top. So you can understand it like this. His xiphoid process is forward. His entire thorax is in an extended position. But in the process of extension, the gap here is narrow. The gap here is narrow. So his chest curve becomes straight. And then it's just that he is like this. Many coaches are like this. That's how it is. When you look at someone like this, do you really think their transverse thoracic muscle isn't tight? No, that's not the case. His entire rib cage is flared out like this, but the area here is short. The gaps between the ribs here are short. You can measure it and see for yourself. That's why it's very hard for him to develop his upper chest, because he can't open up this area. So whether you see someone like this or like that, it's still short here. This area is always short. So once you open up this area, then he might actually be able to get air in. At that point, if you do chest presses again, you'll actually be able to train your chest. In other words, you can think of it this way. The vast majority of gym members and trainers don't have the ability to do proper chest breathing. They can't fully fill this area with air. If they could, their chest would look twice as big because they could inflate this part. Because I specifically push myself hard. I often hold 100 kilograms. Didn't I just post a video in the group yesterday? I often make him lower his diaphragm as much as possible, then find a way to raise it as high as possible. Only then can you really fill your chest with air. Let me show you how to fill your chest with air. Now try to direct as much air as possible into this area, not into your abdomen. So if I do a chest breath, it looks like this. First, I exhale and empty my lungs completely. See that? Filling up with air like this is called passive chest expansion. For my dad, all the air fills up the back here, so even if I just push my chest out randomly, it can still expand because there's strong support, there's a solid base. So how do most people try to puff out their chest? The straighter you arch your chest when pushing, the more your ribs will flare outward, and the more your lower chest and abs will become inseparable. Because you always push like this. Even when you push with your shoulders, you do it the same way. That's why I say many people can't distinguish between active exhalation and passive exhalation, or between actively puffing out your chest and passively puffing it out. When you puff out your chest, you need to fill it with air, because a lot of people can't inhale into the upper part of their lungs, so your upper chest can't rise. When we train, you should be able to hold a toothpick between your pecs. That's how tight it should be. If you're a man out there trying to build a career, but you don't even have a chest line, how are you going to build any career? Let me tell you again. You can't achieve this just by doing body weight breathing exercises. You have to increase the intensity. You have to add weight. Didn't I tell you yesterday? Even the best physical therapy in the world only focuses on activation and realignment. You can also understand it this way. We need to align knowledge and action. Even the most famous physical therapists and rehabilitation doctors in the world, they know a lot, but they do little. Because what you're doing is sports rehabilitation, and even breathing exercises are a form of training. So first you have to exercise yourself, you have to practice yourself. If you don't exercise at all, how can you call it sports rehabilitation? That's exactly why they don't exercise themselves. They think about exercise, watch exercise, and understand exercise, but that's how they approach it. They believe exercise should be like that. That's why I say that even the most famous rehabilitation doctors and physical therapists can't replace the top-level trainers for NBA players or World Cup athletes. They simply can't substitute for those athletes' rehab specialists, because the biggest difference is this. Their understanding of exercise, one comes from actual training, the other from thinking about it. Some believe if they do inclined bench presses and keep increasing the weight, they can build their upper chest. But if you do it this way, you'll never get results. You can't get air into your chest. How are you supposed to train like that? You don't have any support in the back. That's because they don't train, so they think it's simple. When I teach the instructors in our team, some of them have been with me for 10 years. I want them to train their arms, to teach them how to work on their biceps and triceps. But when it comes to a bicep curl, they can't even grip it properly. When it comes to alignment, finding the right plane, I've taught some people hand in hand for 3 years, and some still can't get it. It's only through more practice that you realize how difficult this really is. Let me give you an example. The biceps are located at the front of the arm. If you study its anatomy, you'll know, it attaches to the tubercle at the top in sports science. Then, in the diagrams, it shows that below, the biceps attaches to the radius. Its main function is elbow flexion, and the long head also has the function of forearm supination. Everyone knows this function. If you study anatomy, you know it. Go ahead and train according to this function, but I guarantee you won't make progress. Why? Because you only remember the function itself. When it comes to actually performing this movement, you need to know, should my body's center of gravity be forward or back? Where exactly should my scapula be positioned? Which direction should my elbow pit face? How should I grip with my hand? And during the upward movement, how should I keep my wrist? How do I align my wrist, elbow, and shoulder so that all three are in the same plane? How can I ensure the movement path always stays consistent? That no matter how I perform the motion, there's no deviation. So it's not here one moment, there another, the next, constantly shifting. To achieve this, you'll realize what's really holding back your biceps training isn't that you don't know the biceps function, but that you can't consistently control your center of gravity. When you start the movement, you're activating your erector spinae instead. During the exercise, your wrist collapses. As you begin, your hand hooks. After you come up, your arm drifts inward, and when you lower it, it drifts outward. There are countless factors that are even more important than the origin and insertion functions of the muscle that determine whether you can actually train that muscle effectively. And this is even more true when it comes to training other areas. So this is why I say you can also understand it this way. As coaches, we originally just lifted weights, but if you haven't studied sports rehabilitation, you should later supplement your knowledge with these pathological concepts and theories. At that point, you'll have an advantage. The world's top physical therapists are strongest in knowledge, while coaches around the world are strongest in practical application. For us to catch up to their knowledge is much easier than for them to catch up to our practical skills. Do you understand what I mean? So our strengths actually give us more of an edge than theirs do, because we can catch up to their strengths. But they can't catch up to our strengths. Do you know why? Because they haven't been training since they were young. Now they're already in their 40s or 50s. At this age, they're trying to rediscover muscle sensation, relearn movement control, re-engage their neural recruitment, and regain joint stability during dynamic movements. Then, on top of that, they have to ramp up the intensity to such a high level. But because they're older, their muscle growth rate has already slowed down. They can't possibly understand what it feels like for us to squat with several hundred kilograms on our joints because they've never experienced it. So this feeling is something they can only imagine. But if you design something based on your imagination, can it really be suitable for these people? That's why I say all these things they come up with are only suitable for people who don't do much physical labor or intense exercise. In fact, the world's greatest inventions in physical therapy today are all designed for people who sit for long periods, for people who don't move much, not for athletes on the sports field. And for manual laborers, there's a gap, a real disconnect. That gap is right here with us. No matter how good my Pilates is, no matter how stable my core muscles are, I still can't just go and compete in a strongman competition, nor can I suddenly lift 100 kilograms because I haven't trained those large muscle groups and I haven't practiced the coordination between core stability and the movement muscles working together. The inventors themselves don't include this group, so the things they invented aren't targeted at these people. But I'm saying, the entrepreneurs you're dealing with, they want to play ball, they want to go running. At this point, it's up to us to make up for this shortcoming. Now, let me tell you, as long as a person's diaphragm is in a low position, their transverse thoracic muscle will be tense. I'll tell you another characteristic, as long as a person has pain, even if it's just pain in the sole of the foot. As long as there is pain anywhere in the body, the transverse thoracic muscle will contract immediately. Do you know why? Because exhaling can relieve pain. Exhaling can reduce all kinds of pain. So whenever someone is in pain, their body will naturally want to exhale more to ease the pain. At this point, if their expiratory muscles can't generate enough force, they can only rely on the transverse thoracic muscle. So pain in any part of the body. Exhaling relieves it. If you exhale to ease pain, the transverse thoracic muscle contracts. If your diaphragm is low and thoracic muscles are tense, when you feel pain, your transverse thoracic muscle will be tense.